The first night my husband disappeared, the silence in our mansion was the loudest thing I had ever heard. My name was Sophia Sterling, and I had married a billionaire just 8 hours earlier. Now, I was completely alone. I'd signed that piece of paper thinking it would save my father. I had no idea it had just sold my life. Only a month ago, my entire world was falling apart. Sterling and Sons, my father's life's work, was bleeding out. My days were filled with the sound of his hushed, panicked phone calls and the sight of his shoulders, slumped in defeat, as he stared at stacks of overdue notices. He'd made a bad deal, a huge error that left our family company vulnerable, and our competitors were circling like sharks. We weren't just facing bankruptcy, we were facing total ruin. Then, one rainy Tuesday, my father called me into his study. The room, which usually smelled of old books and his comforting pipe, was stale with desperation. On his desk, right next to a photo of my late mother, was a folder. Inside was a marriage contract. The groom's name? Alistair Blackwood. I'd never met him. I'd never even seen a picture of him. All I knew were the rumors. A reclusive billionaire, a ghost in the financial world who bought and sold empires from the shadows. The contract was simple. He would absorb all of my father's debt and personally guarantee the future of our company. The price was me. "He needs a wife, Sophia," my father whispered, unable to look me in the eye. "For his own reasons. It's just a business arrangement. A partner in name only." But I knew what it really was. A transaction. My life for his legacy. He didn't force me, not out loud. But the shame in his eyes, the sheer weight of his despair, that was heavier than any command. I looked at the picture of my mom, her smiling face a memory from a happier time. I thought of the families who depended on our company. And with a hand that barely shook, I picked up the pen. That one signature wasn't just a signature. It was the end of my life as I knew it, and the first sentence of a terrifying new chapter. The Blackwood estate wasn't a home. It was a fortress of glass and dark stone carved into a private mountainside, a place that seemed to swallow sunlight instead of reflecting it. As a car with blacked-out windows drove me through the imposing iron gates, a chilling sense of isolation washed over me. This place was beautiful, no doubt, but it was the beauty of a perfectly crafted, very expensive cage. I met him in the grand foyer. Alistair Blackwood wasn't a ghost. He was a storm. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with eyes the color of a winter sky. He was handsome in a way that was almost cruel, his features sharp and unforgiving. There was no warmth in his gaze, no welcome in his voice. "Sophia," he said, his voice a low, even baritone completely devoid of emotion. "Welcome. Mrs. Gable will show you to your wing." My wing. Not our wing. He offered a handshake. His touch was brief and cold, a pure formality. Our wedding was a sterile event in a lawyer's office, with more attorneys present than guests. We both said, "I do," with all the passion of confirming a dental appointment. Then, it was back to the silent mansion. That evening, he walked me to the entrance of my wing, a lavish suite of rooms larger than my old apartment. "Good night, Sophia," he said, his eyes scanning the hallway behind me, as if he were looking for a threat. And then he just turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the marble hall until they were gone. I waited that first night. Dressed in the silk pajamas that had been laid out for me, I sat on the edge of an enormous bed and just listened. For footsteps. For the turn of a handle. For anything that would prove I wasn't completely alone in this vast, empty palace. Nothing. The only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. He never came. The next morning, he was gone before I woke. A single place was set for me in a breakfast room that could have seated 40. The staff moved around me like silent phantoms, their faces professionally blank, refusing to meet my eyes. When I finally got up the nerve to ask the head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, when Mr. Blackwood might be back, her face tightened. "Mr. Blackwood keeps his own schedule," she said, her tone making it clear that was the end of that conversation. And that became the routine. Every single night, Alistair vanished. He'd reappear before dawn, sometimes looking exhausted, his jaw tight with a tension that seemed to radiate from his very bones. We'd occasionally pass in the hallways and share a curt nod, two strangers sharing a zip code. The mansion, with its priceless art and sprawling gardens, started to feel less like a home and more like an elaborate prison. A week went by, and the silence only got louder with every night he disappeared. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the staff's eyes followed me with a mix of pity and something else. Was it fear? This wasn't just a cold, loveless marriage. Something was very, very wrong here. My fear slowly started to turn into a defiant curiosity. I might be a prisoner, but I wasn't going to be a passive one. I started walking the halls with purpose, memorizing the layout, noting the cameras hidden in ornate ceiling fixtures, and the pressure sensors I was sure were lurking under the expensive rugs. One afternoon, I found an entire wing of the mansion that was locked. The west wing. I jiggled the handle, but it was solid, immovable. Later, I asked Mrs. Gable about it. A flicker of genuine alarm crossed her face before she smoothed it away. "That wing is private, ma'am," she said, her voice firmer than I'd ever heard it. "It is not for you." Her warning had the opposite effect. It was like a giant, flashing sign. That night, hiding in the shadows of the upper gallery, I overheard two young maids whispering as they polished silver. "She seems nice," one said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Not like the last one." The other shushed her. "Don't talk about that. You know the rules. What happened to Genevieve? We don't talk about it. Ever." Genevieve. The name hit me like a physical blow. The last one. A cold dread, so much deeper than loneliness, snaked its way around my heart. What happened to Genevieve? I was so wrong. This mansion wasn't just hiding my husband's secrets. It was hiding a grave. Genevieve. The name became my obsession. I had to know who she was. My investigation started in the mansion's library, where I found a collection of old photo albums tucked away in a dusty corner. The early ones were full of a young, smiling Alistair with his parents. But the later ones showed him with a woman. She had fiery red hair and a laugh that practically leaped off the page. On the back of one photo, a simple inscription, "Alistair and Genevieve, 2023. His first wife." My resolve hardened. I had to get into the West Wing. It took me 3 days to find a way. In Alistair's study, amongst a collection of antique keys, I found one that looked older and more ornate than the rest. My heart hammered against my ribs as I crept to the West Wing late that night, after the silence told me Alistair was gone. With a trembling hand, I put the key in the lock. It turned. The air inside was still and cool, thick with the smell of dried roses and dust. This wasn't a place of horror, it was a shrine. The rooms were perfectly preserved, a woman's life frozen in time. On a bedside table, next to a silver hairbrush, lay a small, leather-bound book. Genevieve's diary. I sat there for hours, reading by the moonlight filtering through the window. The diary didn't tell a story of a cruel husband. It told a story of a deep, all-consuming love. Genevieve and Alistair were soulmates. But their happiness had attracted darkness. Genevieve's family, the Devereux, were old rivals of the Blackwoods. Her diary spoke of their fury over her marriage, how they saw it as a betrayal. Then, the entries got darker. She wrote about being followed, about strange phone calls, about the terrifying feeling that her own family was closing in. The final entry was scrawled, the ink smudged by what could only have been tears. They found a way to ruin Alistair. A weakness. Your father's company, Sophia. They're orchestrating its collapse. They're going to force Alistair's hand, make him take a new wife, a pawn. They think he won't see it coming. They think they can get to him through her. I have to warn him. And just like that, the truth crashed down on me. I wasn't a payment. I was bait. My father's business didn't just fail, it was pushed. Alistair's coldness, his nightly disappearances, it wasn't rejection. It was protection. He was out there, hunting the very people who had taken Genevieve from him, the same people who now saw me as a tool to destroy him. He built this gilded cage not to imprison me, but to keep me safe. He kept his distance because he thought if he didn't care about me, I couldn't be used as leverage against him. He was trying to fight a war in the shadows all by himself. Just as the sun began to rise, I heard the faint sound of the front door. I walked out of the West Wing, leaving the door wide open, the diary held tight in my hand. Alistair was standing in the foyer, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He had a fresh cut on his cheek and a darkness in his eyes that spoke of things I couldn't even imagine. He saw me, and then his gaze drifted past me to the open door of the West Wing. For the first time, his mask of indifference shattered, replaced by a look of pure, agonizing pain. "Sophia," he breathed, his voice raw. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just walked toward him and held out the diary. "You should have told me," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You shouldn't be fighting this alone." He looked from the diary to my face, and the walls he had so carefully built came crashing down. He told me everything. How the Devereux family had murdered Genevieve and made it look like an accident. How they had systematically dismantled my father's company to force him into this corner, creating a vulnerability he had to control. "I married you to protect you," he confessed, his voice thick with guilt. "To bring you into the one place they couldn't reach you. I stayed away because I thought, if they saw I didn't care, they would have no leverage. I was so wrong. I only put you in more danger." In that moment, he wasn't some mysterious billionaire. He was just a man, haunted by his past, desperately trying to keep it from happening again. The power imbalance that had defined our relationship was an illusion. He was just as trapped by all this as I was. I had a choice. I could run from this cage, try to disappear and save myself. Or I could stay. I could stand with this man who, in his own strange way, had tried to be my protector. I looked at his tired face, at the torment in his eyes, and I didn't see a monster. I saw a partner. I reached out, and my fingers brushed against the cut on his cheek. He flinched but didn't pull away. Then I took his hand. It was the first time we had ever touched by choice, not by contract. "You're not alone in this anymore, Alistair," I said. A flicker of disbelief, then a wave of relief washed over his face. He squeezed my hand, a silent promise passing between us. My life had been sold with a single signature, but standing there with him, ready to face a shared enemy, I realized I hadn't lost my life at all. I had just found it. What would you have done in Sophia's shoes? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this.